Hi everyone. Today, let's talk about savings. Savings is a pretty straightforward concept. You pick a goal, you put money into a bank account, and once you reach that goal, you go and buy the thing or you take the vacation, whatever it is you were saving up for. When it comes to an emergency account, how much money should you have in there? 3 months, 6 months, a full year? What if I have too much money in savings? How much is too much? How does that affect my long-term financial goals? Well, let's answer some of those questions. As always, there will be some jelly at the end, which is something I enjoyed outside of the markets. If you have big dreams like buying the 1966 Shelby Cobra Super Snake, or if you're just getting started on your financial journey, definitely like and subscribe. This particular model is one of only 2 that Carroll Shelby drove himself. It had a twin supercharged V8 engine that put out 800 horsepower. And it recently sold at Barrett-Jackson for $5.5 million. To keep your dreams at the front of your mind, like and subscribe. Welcome to the Portfolio Bulletin. Let's get started. Let me start off by saying that if you are saving for something or you just have emergency funds sitting in a bank account and they are not in a high yield savings account, then you are leaving money on the table. You definitely need to get a high yield savings account, just like CIT Bank, which is the bank that I use. They're offering 1% right now, which is down a little bit, but it's definitely better than nothing. So how much should you keep in savings in your bank account? It says here, everyone has an opinion on how much cash you should keep in your bank account. Let me know in the comments below how much you think you should keep in your bank account. It goes on to say it's completely dependent on your financial situation. You need to account for your regular bills, your discretionary spending, and a portion needs to go into your savings account for your emergency fund. It then says the cough situation has really highlighted how important it is to have an emergency fund. When you're suddenly laid off or you can't go to work for whatever reason, an emergency fund is critical to surviving during those periods. But how much does that emergency fund need to be? Every dollar that you put into your emergency fund, even if it's making 1%, like accounts offered by CIT Bank, that's still going to cost you if you have investments that are gaining 9%, like my lending club right now, or even 5%, like Worthy Bonds. The opportunity cost to putting that money in an FDIC secured savings account can be substantial. So as a demonstration of what opportunity cost looks like, I have $10,000 here, and then I have the number of years that that money was invested or saved, and then I have the growth rates. I have 1% for the high yield savings account, I have 5% for Worthy Bonds, and then I have 9% for Lending Club. And then that gives me an account value for the given amount of time. So you can see for 5 years at 1%, you get $10,512. And then at 9%, you would have $15,656. And then over the course of 30 years at 1%, you would have $13,496. And then at 9%, you would have $147,305. And then this graph shows exactly what I mean. Over the course of 5 years, it's not that different. It's the difference of about $5,000. But if you leave that money sitting in there waiting for a rainy day for 30 years and it never comes, you're costing yourself more than $130,000. So again, how much money should you keep in your bank account? It says here, one of the ways to set up your budget is the 50-30-20 rule. And that means 50% of your money goes to your fixed costs. These are things that you have to pay every single month, like your bills or your mortgage or your car payment, things that are not discretionary. Next is the 30%. That's money that goes towards discretionary spending. This is money that goes towards food, eating at restaurants, and things like going to the movies, buying a new tablet, or even contributing to charity. The article cites here that 30% could potentially be a little bit high, and I would tend to agree with this. The last section is the 20% section that goes towards your savings and your future goals. So people that say that the 30% is too high say that you should save a little bit more money and put it towards your financial goals. I look at financial goals as paying myself first, so I tend to prioritize this a little bit more than discretionary spending. And depending on your goals, you might want to raise the amount of money that you put towards your financial goals. Another example of a budget is the Dave Ramsey budget. He breaks it down line by line, specifically how much you should spend on each category. If you struggle with self-discipline in terms of your finances, this is definitely a good way to go. Otherwise, you can just give yourself wide range percentages like the last budget. All right, so let's talk emergency funds. There's lots of different opinions on emergency funds. Some people say 6 months, as it says here. If your budget is $5,000, then you should save $30,000. It says here, personal financial guru Susie Orman advises at least an 8-month emergency fund because that's how long it takes the average person to find a job. And yet others say a 3-month emergency fund. And finally, others say you don't need an emergency fund at all if you have minimal debt and have liquid investments and quality insurance. The article then goes on to suggest exactly what I do. Keep a couple of months in a savings account, something that's FDIC insured, generally up to the 3-month mark, and then everything from 3 to 6 or 8 months, whichever you choose, goes into a relatively safe investment account. That way you still have the benefit of allowing that money to grow, but not completely risk all of your emergency fund. So how much should you keep in your savings account? The point of a savings account is so that you can't really get to it as easily as a checking account and so that it can grow. There's also legal limitation that says you can only withdraw 6 times per month. In terms of your checking account, this one's a little bit more based on self-control. You should definitely have enough to pay your bills and not get hit with overdraft fees. You also don't want too much money in there to tempt you to spend too much. So I know we've talked about this a little bit already, but let's see what the article has to say about it. The first part of this article talks about doing the math, but since we already did the math, we can move on. It goes on to say that the first thing that people ignore when making their emergency account is their debt. If you're carrying a lot of debt, specifically credit card debt, with a very high interest rate, it doesn't make a lot of sense to build your emergency fund instead of paying off your debts. If you're concerned about things like repairs to your car, and you want to have enough money to maybe fix a transmission, it's kind of too late if you're carrying credit card debt because you might be carrying enough credit card debt to pay off something like a transmission several times, and that your financial emergency has already begun several $1,000s ago if you have thousands of dollars in credit card debt. Going back to this chart, it does work the other way as well. So if you have thousands of dollars in credit card debt and it takes you 10 or 20 years to pay that off because you're only paying the minimum amount, and often your credit card interest rates are going to be much higher than 1 or even 9%, then the amount paid for that $10,000 is going to be significantly higher. For example, it's not uncommon to have an interest rate of 19% versus 9%, and if it takes you 10 years to pay off that $10,000, again, assuming that you're not using that credit card at all during that period, you would end up paying well over $25,000 over the course of that time. The last argument for an emergency fund is, what if I lose my job? The article rebuts this with saying you should have unemployment insurance to help cover times between jobs. If your employer pays into an unemployment insurance for you, then if you ever get fired, then you can dip into that unemployment insurance to help bridge the gap until you find a new job. They go on to caveat this with, if you are not a W-2 employee, meaning if you own your own business or you're a sole proprietor in any way, then you probably don't have unemployment insurance, and you would have to get pandemic unemployment assistance, which is a different type of insurance. This is probably the weakest argument against not having a solid emergency fund. It definitely makes sense to help have a little bit of money to cushion between jobs, even if you do have unemployment insurance. The question is, how do you do this in the smartest way possible? The bottom line is, if you have a positive net worth, or at least don't have any high interest debts, you should create an emergency fund, but not in the same way that we have thought about them in the past. An emergency fund no longer means putting all of your cash into a savings account that doesn't bear any interest. These kinds of accounts don't even keep up with inflation. So at the very least, use a high yield savings account, and even if it doesn't keep up completely with inflation, it still does better than traditional savings accounts. Also, there are other choices like blue chip stocks or bond funds that incur a little bit more risk, but these are fully liquid investments and they can be accessed in a short period of time. If you're curious about my emergency fund, I will link my maximum growth savings plan in the description. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes, and make your own decisions with your own money and consult your own financial advisors. Comment down below how many months of savings you keep or how you manage your savings accounts. Definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video. And with that, let's get to the jelly. Today's jelly is Marquise Scott. This one is definitely a throwback. It came out on September 23rd, 2011, and it currently has 142 million views. He's a very amazing dancer, and he focuses on isolations. So here's what that looks like. Clearly, he's an amazing dancer with an unbelievable amount of control over his different body parts. He makes them move in a way that certainly doesn't seem human, but clearly he's doing it. If you want to watch the full video, I will link it in the description. Comment down below what you think of his dancing, and make sure you like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video.